The first thing Commander Drev felt was the silence, but not the customary silence of deep space. Every pilot, every explorer, knew that silence. This was different. This was the silence of things that had once been noisy and had now become very, very still. Drev pressed two of his four hands against the viewing glass and stared into the darkness. What was wrong with the stars? They were blocked not by a planet, not a moon, not a gas cloud. They were blocked by silhouettes. Hundreds of silhouettes, frozen dead and cold against the blackness. He could not clearly discern them from such a distance. But his gut, the Vilkrat, had specialized viscera, mainly used for processing information at speeds inaccessible to the brain, was telling him to stop the ship. He stopped the ship. "Scan," he said. His voice sounded quieter than he had intended. Lieutenant Koss initiated the scan. The results came in 4 seconds. Koss stared at the screen. Then she ran the scan again, turned in her chair, and looked at Drev with that flat, lifeless expression that meant she had no words. "How many?" Drev asked. "At least 400, Koss replied. "Probably more. The density increases as you go deeper." Drev looked again at the silhouettes in the dark. 400 dead ships, floating in the cold space beyond the 9th planet of a small yellow star system that no one from the Galactic Research Corps had ever deemed worth attention. The system was unremarkable. The star was unremarkable. The planets were unremarkable. There were 8 or 9 of them, depending on how generously you defined the term. And none of them had spawned a spacefaring civilization. On the 3rd planet, there was what? Basic biology. Simplest forms. Vegetation. What else? Animals. A research rating of 2 out of 10. Not worth a second glance. And yet, 400 dead ships in the darkness beyond the furthest ice planet. Drev ordered the crew to hold position. He opened a communication channel to the base relay and sent a contact report. The relay was 6 days away. 6 days for the signal to arrive. 6 days for an answer to return. He had 12 days of waiting, and nothing else to do but look at the silhouettes. He looked at them. "Move forward," he said. Slowly. 0.5 kilometer per minute. Koss looked at him. "Slowly," he repeated. Infinite patience. The movement began. The first wreck they approached was enormous. It was 3 times the length of their ship. At one time, it had been a warship. You could tell by the gun emplacements, the armor plating, the thick bow, designed to punch through defensive fire. Most of the plating was gone, torn away, melted, or simply evaporated, exposing the skeleton, as if it had been eaten and left to dry. Drev held a doctorate in xenoarchaeology. He had spent 40 years cataloging dead civilizations and what they left behind. He recognized the design language of this ship, the curves, the tapering nose, the specific geometry of the gun ports. He recognized it because this design was in his textbooks. "It's a Kret warship," he said. No one said a word. The Kret Empire had been one of the great powers of the galaxy 8,000 years ago. At the zenith of their glory, they controlled 11 star systems. They were expansive, aggressive, genius engineers. They had vanished from galactic history so completely that no one had ever found a convincing explanation. In 1 century they were there, the next, they were gone. Their planets were empty, their ships missing. Historians called it the Great Retreat. Some said civil war, others plague, still others that the Krets had simply gone somewhere else. But here was a Kret warship, dead for 8,000 years, floating in the darkness beyond an ice world that no one cared about. "Continue moving," Drev said. They moved on. The second wreck was not Kret. Drev did not recognize it at all. The hull consisted of a smooth, organic material, shaped not like a machine, but like a seed pod, huge and pale. Technology pointed to something very ancient, much more ancient than the Kret ship. The sensor readings were failing because of the material. Ancient alloys, ancient composites, things that did not match any record in the materials database. Koss tried to find at least something in the archives. She searched for materials matching these readings, searched for geometry corresponding to the shape. She found nothing like it. "Not in the database," she said. "Take samples," Drev ordered. "Mark the position." They marked it and moved on. 3 hours after beginning the survey, Drev stopped counting individual wrecks. There were too many. They were everywhere. Some were huge, clearly warships of colossal power. Some were small escort vessels or fighters, grouped in dead formations around large vessels, as if they had tried to protect something and had failed. Some wrecks were blown to bits, representing only rotating clouds of debris. The variety was staggering. A dozen different hull materials, 7 different engine signatures burned into old exhaust traces that still held faint chemical signatures in the vacuum. Weapon types Drev could recognize, and types he could not. Ship designs from cultures that were in history textbooks, and designs from cultures about which there were no records. This meant that either the database was incomplete, or these ships came from civilizations so ancient that no record of them remained. In the first scan, he counted 11 different species. The second yielded 16. "What happened here?" asked the pilot. Fen. Fen was young. This was only his third flight. He had never seen anything like this. However, no one had ever seen anything like this. "A battle," Ko said. "Not a battle," Drev corrected. "Look at the oxidation degree of those old hulls. Look at the decay profiles. These ships perished at different times." He pointed to the pale silhouette of the seed pod. That wreck has existed for at least 15,000 years. According to surface analysis, that Kret ship perished 8,000 years ago. He pointed to a group of angular ships that looked as if they had been built by someone who did not believe in straight angles. "These are no more than 1,000 years old, maybe less." Silence. "Different battles," Fen said slowly. "Different species, different times." 15,000 years, Drev said. He allowed the words to hang in the air of the cabin. 15,000 years of ships coming here and perishing here. Different civilizations, different eras, different technologies. All of them ended up as trash in the cold gloom beyond an ice world of a worthless star system. Something killed them all. Something was still here. They found it 2 hours later. It was in the center of the graveyard, like a stone in the center of a frozen pond. Everything around was death and drift. It, however, was neither dead nor drifting. Approaching, Drev thought it would be a planet, maybe a heavily fortified moon, something natural upon which a structure had been built. He tried to create a theory about what kind of natural geography could serve as an anchor point for 15,000 years of killings. It was not natural. It was artificial. The structure was hard to look at, not because it was ugly, but because its scale was wrong. His brain tried to determine the size and constantly overestimated it. It took 3 separate scans before the number settled, and even then, it did not seem real. The main structure was 60 kilometers in diameter. External defensive platforms, there were dozens, extending in a wide perimeter, added another 40 kilometers in all directions. The entire complex was larger than some moons. It was dark, without lights, without energy emissions, without thermal signatures exceeding the temperature of deep space. The scanners detected metals, composites, and something else, a material they could not classify in quantities practically immeasurable, but no energy, no activity. It looked dead. It looked like everything else here, but Drev didn't believe for a second that it was dead. "What is it?" Fen asked. "A fortress," Drev said, because that was what it was. Whatever else it might be, whatever civilization had built it, whatever goal it pursued, it was designed the way only military objects were designed. Thick, multi-layered, created to take damage and stay standing. The outer hull, even darkened by time and covered with the scars of thousands of years of battles, still conveyed a sense of mass and durability. It was something built by someone who decided that it would not move and invested colossal resources to make that true. Gun systems, Drev counted 200 that he could see and stopped, because the number caused a specific feeling he did not like. "The gun systems are cold," Koss said, "sleeping. Whatever power source it uses, energy is not flowing to the weapons." "That's something at least," Fen remarked. "Is it?" Drev asked. The young pilot thought and said nothing. There were marks on the hull. Drev ordered them to be enlarged. Koss projected them onto the main screen, and they looked at them for a long time. These were not damage marks, not corrosion. These were intentional symbols, carved with precision into the metal or whatever the outer surface consisted of. Language. A writing system, geometric and angular, built from straight lines and specific angles repeating in patterns that Drev recognized as a visual signature of fixed meaning. He did not recognize this script. He entered it into the linguistic database. The database contained 412 known writing systems from 69 different types of cultures, living and extinct. It searched for a match. No matches found. "Unknown script," Koss read from the screen. "Load the nearest visual analogs," Drev said. The database suggested 3 possible options based only on visual similarity. The first, an extinct trading script used by a minor species from the outer arm, which disappeared about 9,000 years ago. The second, a ceremonial system of designations of a civilization that historical records simply called the Builders, a species so ancient that nothing was known about them except that they built several megastructures before disappearing. The third was labeled as a speculative fragment of text found on a single damaged artifact in a museum collection. Origin unknown. Drev looked at the signs on the wall of the fortress. Geometric, angular, precise. Carved by what? Something that understood what it was doing. Carved by someone, by some creature, by some hand, by some mind that had looked at this fortress and decided to write upon it. Were they bragging? Were they warning? Or were they recording it like a traveler making notches on a stone to count the days? He did not know. "I need a full recording of every sign visible on the outer hull," he said. "Full detail, every angle. We will send this along with the report." He looked at the fortress. He thought about the ships. Behind him were hundreds of ships, a minimum of 16 species, 15,000 years of dead bodies. All of them came here. None of them returned home. Something in that fact organized itself in his mind with a clarity he did not desire. He was a scientist. He believed in data, analysis, and painstaking work. But he was also a Vilcrat, which meant having a gut. And his gut was talking to him now in a very simple language. He was looking at something that had fought the Kred Empire and won. The Kred Empire had conquered 8 star systems. They had gun platforms capable of splitting a moon. They had been the most powerful civilization in the galaxy for 2,000 years before they disappeared. And every historian who had studied them agreed that they did not disappear because someone had defeated them except for this case. Whatever this fortress represented, whoever built it, something here had defeated them and defeated everyone else who came after. 16 species, possibly more, over 15,000 years. Drev remembered the third planet, the one with simple biology, vegetation, and animals, with a research rating of 2 out of 10. He thought about the alignment. The fortress was in a specific position relative to the center of the system, not by accident. If you drew a line from the fortress to the center of the system, the third planet was on that line. He thought about this for a long time. His contact report would be the most important document ever sent by an officer of the Research Corps. He began to write it in his head. He started with, "We have found something, and I have no adequate words to describe what this is, but I will try." He thought again about the third planet, about the small, worthless world hanging in the middle of the habitable zone of an ordinary yellow star. He wondered what type of civilization builds a 60-kilometer fortress, places it at the edge of its star system, and leaves it there to kill everyone who approaches. He thought about what type of civilization builds something that stands 15,000 years later. He looked at the cold, dark mass of the fortress. It looked back at him, but saw nothing. It had no lights, no heat, no emissions. It was patient. It had been patient for a very long time. Drev took his hands off the glass, returned to his console, and sat down. His whole body felt that he needed to be very careful about where he was and what he was doing. As if the universe had just become larger, changing the rules. "We are holding position," he said. "We are observing. We are not approaching further." No one argued. Infinite patience froze in the darkness, waiting for an answer that would come in 12 days. The fortress froze in the darkness, waiting for something that could last much longer. The contact report reached the Research Corps relay at 3:40 system time, which meant the duty officer who received it was tired, had not finished her coffee, and had been watching a drama recording for the last 3 hours. Her name was Coordinator Fez. She was an Arvani, which meant she had 4 eyes and 0 patience for things that disrupted quiet night shifts. She opened the report because it was marked as urgent. She set her drink aside, read the first paragraph, read it again, then opened a priority channel to the director of the Corps, woke him up at home, and told him he needed to read this. And no, it could not wait until morning. The director read the report. He called the High Research Council. The council called the representative of the Galactic Assembly. The representative was at a dinner party. He stepped outside to answer the call and never went back inside. By the time Drev received an answer 12 days later, the report had already passed through 47 different offices of 9 different species governments. It had spawned 112 internal memos, 2 emergency council sessions, and a classified military assessment that 7 different admirals had signed with hands that were not entirely steady. The response to Drev was short. "Hold position. Do not approach. Do not attempt to establish contact. Reinforcements are on the way. Expected arrival, 40 days." Below, added by someone whose name was deleted, were 4 words. "You have done right, Commander." Drev read it twice, folded it, went to the viewing window and looked at the fortress. 40 days. He had been looking at it for 12. It had not stirred. It had not turned on. It had done nothing but sit there, being enormous, cold, and covered in writings that no one could read. Every day, Koss conducted a full scan, and every day the results were the same. Sleeping, cold, patient. He began to feel as if the fortress was aware of their presence, just as a very large and very confident. Something is aware of something very small, not threatened, not curious, just aware. He did not share this thought with the crew. The reinforcements consisted not only of core ships. Drev expected 3 or 4 vessels, a senior archaeologist, some specialized equipment, maybe a small military escort, because the Corps had protocols regarding objects that might contain active weaponry. What arrived on day 41 was a fleet. 40 ships, 20 of them the Vilkrat fleet, 8 scientific vessels of the Arvani. 4 flew under the banner of the Thorn Collective, which had not cooperated with anyone on anything for the last 60 years, but apparently made an exception. The rest were a mix of Sendul and 2 species Drev had only read about in diplomatic briefings. They all stopped at the edge of the graveyard. They all went quiet. When the scan results returned, the fleet commander was Admiral Sarif. She was old even by Vilkrat standards, and she had the face of a person who had spent decades making quick decisions and was excellent at hiding the cost of those decisions. She boarded the Infinite Patience because it was the only ship that had been there long enough to know anything. She sat across from Drev and read his full report, the expanded one that he had been writing and refining for 40 days, without saying a word. When she finished, she looked at him. "How many different species in the wrecks?" she asked. 2 confirmed. He replied, "We believe there are more that we have not identified. The oldest wrecks may belong to civilizations about which no records remain." She nodded slowly. "Kret. Yes, we always believed they simply left," she said. "Found something more interesting and moved on. Some of them." "Yes," Drev said, "or tried to. The ships in the graveyard constitute only a fraction of their military potential at the time of their disappearance. They sent a military fleet here, Admiral, not their entire civilization. Whatever happened to the rest of the Krets, some of them arrived in this star system with warships and did not return." Sarif looked at the report, at the image of the fortress on the screen next to her. "And it is still cold?" she asked. "Still cold," he confirmed. Xenolinguists arrived on day 43. There were 6 of them, of 3 different species. They deployed equipment in the largest cargo bay of the research vessel and began work on the writings from the fortress hull. They had Drev's recordings, which were detailed. They had every known writing system in every database supported by the gathered governments. They compared, contrasted, mapped patterns, and argued with each other in 3 different languages. On day 47, the lead researcher, a very thin Arvani named Dr. Vas, came to Admiral Sarif with a preliminary conclusion. The script was not in any database, but there were fragments not of this script, but of something related to it in the recovered Kret archives. The Krets kept records, and those records had survived in partial form in 3 different galactic museums. In those records, the Krets mentioned a species they had encountered at the edge of what they called the Empty Quarter, a region of space they considered uninhabited and of no strategic value. The Krets had a name for this species. It translated, with all the uncertainty arising from translating a dead language, as something between the stubborn ones and those who will not fall. Kret records indicated that contact had been made with this species twice. The first contact was an attempt at negotiations. The Krets wanted access to the empty star system for resource extraction. The response was described by the Krets as a refusal, delivered without due respect. The second contact was a military fleet. At that point, the Kret records cut off. There were no more entries in that particular archive. Historians of the Vilkrat, Arvani, and Thorn found similar threads when they searched their deep archives. The Thorn had a 7,000-year-old oral tradition about a star system at the edge of explored space where something terrible waited. Their ancestors called it the sealed door. The saying included a warning: "Do not knock, for that which is inside does not sleep, it merely rests." In the Arvani archives, there was a brief reference in a 6,000-year-old diplomatic record. A species called the Vet, apparently, had sent a trading delegation beyond known space, and the delegation did not return. A second expedition, sent to search for the first, sent back a single transmission: "There is a wall here. The wall has weapons. And we are turning back. The vet survived because they turned back. They were still alive. A small spacefaring civilization somewhere in the Middle Arm. In the Dual Archives, they found a military memorial 3,000 years old. It honored a fleet of 200 ships sent to secure a region of space beyond the outer system of a yellow star. There were lists 700 names of crew members. None of them returned home. The memorial called the star system the Dead Maw and ordered all dual pilots at all times to consider the region a restricted zone. Species after species found their thread in the tapestry. They all led here. They all ended here. On day 52, one of the Thorn research vessels sent a probe into the graveyard. This was an approved standard procedure for assessing an object. The probe moved slowly, broadcasting a non-aggressive signal, performing a detailed scan of the wrecks. It worked for 6 hours without incident, when the pilot moved it on a trajectory that brought it within 2 kilometers of the outer defensive platforms of the fortress. This was not approved. The pilot, young, curious, overly self-confident, made the decision without telling anyone. The fortress woke up. Not completely, not in the way Drev had secretly feared. No surge of energy, no weapons, no targeting systems flared up on all frequencies. Something smaller happened, and for some reason, more terrifying. Precisely because of its insignificance, one light turned on. One light on an external platform, the one closest to the probe. A pale blue light, steady, unblinking. The sensors screamed. The energy reading from that single light was greater than the entire power of the fleet. Whatever energy the fortress used, it had not depleted in 15,000 years. The probe pilot pulled it back. The light burned for 11 seconds, then went out. The fortress was cold again. No one said a word on the fleet channels for almost 2 minutes. Seraf's voice finally broke through, very calm, with a barely perceptible rigidity that told Drev she was holding herself together. "All ships," she said, "hold current positions. No further probes within a 10-kilometer radius of the structure. And let someone remove that pilot from duty before I do, and in a way that will affect his career forever." They discussed what the light meant, arguments, theories, and it all went in circles. When Koss discovered the signal, she almost missed it. It was buried in the background noise of the fortress's passive radiation, a low hum of something very large and very old, simply existing. She had been filtering out that noise for weeks. On day 55, she applied a different filter. One of the xenolinguists had suggested it, and under the ambient hum, she discovered something structured, not random, not white noise of sleeping mechanisms. The signal was repeating. A cyclical pattern, repeating every 73 minutes. It was broadcast in a very specific direction. She calculated the vector. She continued the line outward from the fortress through the star system, through the planets, through the inner system where gas giants sat, past the rocky middle worlds, straight to the third planet, the one with vegetation and animals, the one with a research rating of 2 out of 10. The signal was directed at the third planet. Koss looked at her screen for a long time before calling Drev. Drev looked at the screen for a long time before calling Admiral Seraph. Seraph looked at the screen. Her expression did not change. She had the discipline of a person who had received bad news many times and had learned to let her face be a wall. "How long has it been broadcasting?" she asked. "Unknown," Koss said. "We only discovered it today. It could have started after the incident with the probe. It could have been broadcasting for 15,000 years. The signal strength is too low for us to distinguish new from continuous." "What does it say?" Seraph asked. "We don't know yet," Koss said. "Linguists are working on it, but the modulation pattern matches the script on the hull, the same geometric handwriting, the same angular structure." Seraph looked at the star system on the navigation display. She found the third planet, found its orbit, size, basic composition. "Pull up the original research file for this planet," she said. Drev had already opened it. He turned his screen to the Admiral. "Class M world. Nitrogen, oxygen atmosphere, liquid water, land masses, and oceans." The biology assessment was brief. Multicellular organisms, several thousand species of varying complexity. Most notable is a group of bipedal mammals concentrated on large land masses. Observed early tool use. Use of fire, some signs of rudimentary social organization. Research rating, 2 out of 10. Seraph read it. "Read it again." "Bipedal mammals," she said. "Yes," Drev replied. "The fortress was sending signals to a planet full of bipedal mammals. Unknown how long." Seraph froze. Drev thought about what he had not said out loud from the first day. about which he had carefully and with effort remained silent. 54 days. The thing that sat in his head every time he looked at the fortress and thought about what type of civilization builds something that doesn't lose. He thought about the writing on the hull, geometric, angular, in no database. He thought about the bipedal mammals on the third planet, early tools, fire, social organization. He thought about the 15,000 years, about what 15,000 years can do to a species if it started in the right place, about how far a civilization can go from early tool use to a 60-kilometer fortress with weapons that can wake up and fire a warning shot that looks like negligence. He thought about how long the signal had been broadcasting, and he thought about the fact that in all his years of xenoarchaeology, in all the places he had visited, and all the civilizations he had cataloged, he had never encountered a fortress that would send signals to a planet full of creatures that had nothing to do with it, unless they had everything to do with it, unless they were the reason it was built, unless the fortress was broadcasting something not to what isn't there, but to what is still becoming what it will be. He looked at the cold mass of the fortress. He thought about patience. He thought about what an architect builds when they believe with enough certainty in the future to erect something created to wait for it. He thought about what you need to believe regarding your own children, the children of children, stretched over 15,000 years, to leave them a fortress. Admiral Seraph said very quietly, "I think we need to talk about the third planet." Drev said nothing. The fortress said nothing. It had been silent for 15,000 years and was absolutely right in doing so. The Galactic Assembly met for an emergency session on day 61. Representatives of 31 governments sat in the chamber. It was a large room built for large disagreements, and it had seen both during its 400-year history. But the people sitting in it now radiated a specific silence that the chamber had not seen, not the silence of disagreement, but the silence of people trying to decide what scares them and pretending for the sake of their own dignity that they are not scared. The session lasted 9 hours. The debates were long, circular, and returned to the same two positions, like all truly complex disputes, because both positions were reasonable, and neither was completely correct. Position 1. The fortress is sleeping. It has slept for an unknown but very long time. It sent one warning signal when provoked, and when the provocation ceased, it went back to sleep. This is consistent with a defensive system, not an aggressive one. A defensive system built to protect something, and after 15,000 years still protecting it. The correct reaction is caution, study, and patience. If the signal to the third planet is relevant, the correct reaction is to understand why before acting. The representative who put forward this argument was a Vilkrat, specifically Admiral Seraph, who had been recalled for a personal report and who stood on the chamber floor with the posture of a person who had slept poorly for 61 days and did not want to be contradicted. Position 2. The fortress is a weapon of unknown capabilities, origins, and intentions, sitting in the middle of a graveyard that documented 15,000 years of offensive military actions against anyone who approached close. The single warning shot was delivered with power exceeding the entire gathered fleet. A fleet of 40 ships, 9 governments, and the fortress responded to this with one light that lasted 11 seconds. What will happen when it uses all of its weaponry? What will happen when it decides that the assembly fleet is no longer welcome in the graveyard? Every civilization that came here is either dead or retreated and never returned. The correct reaction is to destroy it before it destroys them. The representative who put forward this argument was a thorn. His name was Supreme Counselor Vred. He was very old and possessed the specific intensity of a person who had spent a career being right about things that others ignored. "The oral tradition of my people," Vred said, says, "Do not knock, for that which is inside does not sleep. It merely rests. We are knocking. We have been knocking for 61 days. We have 40 ships sitting in a graveyard. The only question that matters is whether we have the capability to destroy it before it wakes up completely and adds our fleet to its collection." Seraph looked at him across the half-chamber. "And if we cannot destroy it? If we try and fail, what will we achieve, except confirming to whoever runs the fortress that we are enemies?" "Then we will confirm what it already believes," Vred said. "Everyone who came here was an enemy. That is the record of this place. We did not write this record. We only found it." The chamber argued for 9 hours. The vote at the end was not clean. 17 governments voted to send a military strike force and attempt to destroy the fortress. 11 voted for continued observation and study. 3 abstained, which in the language of the Galactic Assembly meant they thought both options were bad and wanted to remain on record as having declared so. 17 was enough. The strike force would be assembled 60 ships, including 6 capital vessels of the Thorn military fleet, which was the most powerful fleet anyone was willing to allocate. Estimated assembly time, 90 days. Estimated transit time, 30 days. 120 days. Sarif sent a message to Drev. It read, "Hold position. Under no circumstances let any ship approach the fortress. We have 120 days, and I intend to use every one of them." Drev read the message, looked at the fortress. He thought that the fortress would not care about their schedule. He thought this, but did not say it. On day 70, the xenolinguists cracked the signal. Not completely, but partially enough. Doctor. Voss had been working on the transmission from the fortress for 16 days, with 4 other linguists and an AI system created specifically for cryptographic analysis. The signal was not a simple transmission. It was multi-layered. The outermost layer was a mathematical sequence prime numbers, geometric progressions, the kind of pattern that any sufficiently advanced mind would recognize as intentional. Below that was a phonetic key, structured like a dictionary, linking sounds to the symbols of the script on the hull. Below that was the message itself. The mathematical layer was created so that it could be solved. It was an invitation to keep digging. A way to say, if you are smart enough to find this, you are smart enough to go further. The phonetic key took most of the 16 days. The message itself, once they had the key, took 4 hours. Voss brought the translation to Drev and Sarif together. She placed it on the table between them. Neither of them took it right away. Then Sarif reached out and took it. The translation was not long. The original message in the script on the hull and in the signal was brief by the standards of important documents of any civilization. It said, "This place belongs to those who created it. We left, but we did not leave. We left what we were so that what comes after us would know where to stand. The system is ours. The wall stands. If you are reading this and you are not us, understand what a graveyard means. It means we do not move. It means we never moved. It means we will not move. If you are reading this and you are our descendants, we are sorry we were not here. Stand where we stood. The wall knows you." Sarif read it twice. "Put it aside. The wall knows you," she said. "Yes," Voss said. "It is a phrase. The wall knows you. It is a recognition system. It is what we believe." Sarif looked at Drev. Drev looked at her. The thing that neither of them had said out loud for 70 days now sat between them, along with the translation as proof. "The research data for the 3rd planet," Sarif said. How old they were, Drev had already checked. He had checked it on day 54, when Koss found the signal, and checked again on day 60. And 3 days ago, when the linguistic team started making progress. "The original survey was conducted 212 years ago," he said. "A standard flyby, no detailed assessment. The designation of bipedal mammals was made by an automated biological scanner of a probe. No follow-up research was done. 212 years. In 212 years, a species with early tools, fire, and rudimentary social organization could do a lot, or nothing. Most species with early tools and fire did nothing for a very long time. Tens of thousands of years of very slow progress. But some did not. Some moved fast. We need a current assessment of the 3rd planet," Sarif said. "We sent a scout probe yesterday," Drev said. "It will reach the inner system in 11 days. Sarif nodded. She took the translation again, read it for the 3rd time. "The wall knows you. A recognition system built into a 15,000-year-old fortress. Waiting for what? For whom?" The scout probe reached the inner system on day 81. Its automated systems began a standard biological survey of the 3rd planet. It scanned the atmosphere, analyzed the surface, categorized land masses and water bodies, and the distribution of life forms across both. The report it sent back was not what everyone expected. The 3rd planet was not primitive. There were cities, thousands of them, on every landmass, connected by networks of infrastructure visible from orbit. There was industry. There were satellites, dozens of them in low orbit, higher ones, several at Lagrange points. There were what looked like large installations on the planet's only large moon. There was trash in the outer system, suggesting regular travel beyond the inner planets. There were at the very edge of the probe's sensor range what looked like engine signatures of spacecraft. Bipedal mammals had not spent the last 212 years sitting around campfires. They had cities, they had satellites, they had spaceships, they were a spacefaring civilization. Voss read the probe report and froze. "They are not a primitive species," she said. They were, Drev said. 200 years ago they were. 200 years, Voss said. She understood what that meant. Every linguist understood history. 200 years is nothing. 200 years is a blink of an eye by civilization time standards. For a species to go from early tool use to orbital satellites in 200 years was not impossible, but unusual. Very unusual. The standard development curve for a spacefaring species, once they reach reliable combustion technology, is from 600 to 1,000 years to the first orbit. These had done it in less than 200. She thought about the signal broadcasting to that planet, broadcasting for an unknown number of years. She thought about what the message said, "If you are reading this and you are our descendants." She thought about the recognition system waiting in the sleeping fortress. She thought about a civilization that built something 15,000 years ago, left a message in it, directed a signal to a small world where something was being born, and waited. Patiently, impossibly patiently. "They're going to come here," Voss said. "Not now," Drev said. "The probe assessment suggests early spaceflight capabilities. Interplanetary, possibly, not interstellar." "Not now," Voss agreed. She looked at the probe report, at the cities, satellites, and installations on the moon. "They move fast," she said. The signal reached a human monitoring station at the edge of the solar system on a day humans called Tuesday. The station was called Sentinel-4. It was in a stable orbit far beyond the last planet. One of 7 automated listening stations that humanity had placed at the edges of the solar system 15 years ago as part of a deep space early warning network. The network was built to detect incoming signals, debris, and everything else moving toward the inner system from the darkness. It had spent 15 years detecting mostly nothing, which was what was expected and what everyone hoped for. The antenna array of Sentinel-4 caught the signal on a routine scan. The onboard AI marked it not as a threat. The signal was not moving. It was not a projectile or an object on an intercept course. It was a broadcast, a transmission, structured and repeating, originating from a point far beyond the furthest planet in a region of space that the network had scanned many times and always found empty. It performed a standard signal analysis. The transmission did not match any known human encoding system. It was not random. The mathematical structure of the outermost layer was identifiable. Sequences, geometric progressions, and it marked it as a possible artificial signal of unknown origin sent to Earth with a priority tag. At the Center for Deep Space Signal Analysis in Bangalore, a junior researcher named Priya Shen was the first human to look at it. She looked at it for a long time. She pulled up the direction of origin. She overlaid it on a map of the outer system. She found the transmission point, looked at it on the navigation map, and then pulled up a long-range telescope array and trained it on the same coordinates. The telescope detected wrecks, hundreds of wrecks, and something else sitting in the center of the debris, large enough to register as a solid mass on the optical array. Dark, still no emissions visible. Priya Shen stared at her screen. She was 26 years old, and she had wanted this job since she was 9. She had imagined more times than she could count how it would feel if the arrays ever caught something real. She hadn't imagined it would feel like the darkness outside had always contained something, like something had always been there, waiting for her to look up. She reached for the internal phone of her supervisor. Her hand was very steady. She was surprised by this. She was surprised, then thought about it for only a moment and was not surprised at all. The debate about whether to send a ship took 11 days, not because humanity was slow, but because humanity was thorough, and because the signal analysis team had found mathematical layers in the transmission and started to break them down. And because every layer they opened revealed something new. And because everyone who had a doctorate and an opinion wanted to be in the room when the next layer was solved. By the 4th day, they had a phonetic key. By the 7th day, they had a working translation of the external message. By the 8th day, the debate stopped being about whether to send a ship and started being about what ship and who would be on it. The translation did that specifically the last 4 words. "The wall knows you." That phrase passed through the xenolinguistics team, then the signal analysis team, then 3 different government scientific committees, and finally the director of Earth's United Space Agency, who read it at 7:00 a.m. with a cup of coffee and sat quietly for a long time before calling her deputy and saying, "We are going to need a ship." The ship they sent was named the Ganges. It was not a warship. Humanity had warships. Small ones, built in the last 40 years as the solar system was becoming more bustling and outer colonies demanded protection from accidental disputes over mining rights. The Ganges was not one of them. It was a deep exploration vessel, the best Earth had. Fast, well-equipped, built to go far and stay outside for a long time. The crew consisted of 8 people. Commander Yara Oshi was in charge. She was 43, of Nigerian-Canadian descent, and had spent most of her career exploring the moons of gas giants. She was the person who read a situation quickly and spoke only after she had something to say. Her crew respected her, which in the tight quarters of a deep space ship was the only currency that mattered. The science lead was Dr. Marcus Webb, a British man of 50, who had built a career on xenolinguistics despite the fact that until 3 weeks ago there was no confirmed xenolinguistic material to work with. He had spent a decade preparing for a moment everyone said would never come, and he had the specific energy of a person who had been right about something for a very long time, and to whom they were now giving evidence to prove it. He slept 4 hours a day and talked constantly. The rest of the crew consisted of engineers, pilots, a medical officer, and a systems specialist named Hannah Cho, who possessed the quiet competence of a person who had fixed every possible thing that could go wrong on a spaceship and was ready for things she hadn't even thought of yet. They left Earth orbit on Thursday. It took them 19 days to reach the outer system. No one told them about the alien fleet. It was not an oversight. It was a calculation made by several committees who believed, probably correctly, that informing a crew of 8 civilians that they were flying to a place occupied by 40 warships of 9 extraterrestrial governments might affect their willingness to go. The mission described the signal, the transmission coordinates, and the mathematical structure of the message. It described the size of the object by the coordinates. It did not describe the graveyard. It did not describe the collection of alien ships holding position at its edge. Oshi found out when the Ganges was 4 days away, and Hana Cho picked up active sensor pings from the direction they were heading. "These are target scans," Cho said, which was not a phrase anyone expected to hear on a scientific mission. Oshi looked at the data. She looked at them for a long time. She identified the scan patterns. She estimated the number of sources. She did the math. 40 ships, she said. "Approximately," Cho said. Oshi opened a channel to Earth and filed a very short and very pointed report. She described the scans and the estimated size of the fleet, and she said, "An explanation would be appreciated. We are continuing course." The answer from Earth took 8 hours. It was longer than her report and contained significantly more information than her brief briefing. She read it at the crew mess table with Webb looking over her shoulder because he couldn't help himself, and the rest of the crew sitting around the table because rumors on a small ship spread fast. When she finished, she laid the screen face down on the table. Webb read the full report. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 15,000 years, he said. "Yes," Oshi said, "and no one in the history textbooks." Webb leaned back. He looked at the ceiling. 15,000 years ago, our ancestors were just starting to invent agriculture. Some of them, Oshi said. "The ones we know about." Webb looked at her. She looked at him. "Continue moving," she said. The graveyard was worse than the report described. Reading about hundreds of abandoned ships was one thing, passing through them was another. The Ganges moved slowly. Oshi made them crawl, and for 3 hours the crew sat at the viewing ports and said almost nothing. The scale was wrong in a way that was hard to process, not just the number of wrecks, their variety, shapes that made no sense by human engineering standards, materials that caught the light in wrong ways, gun systems on dead hulls that were still recognizable as gun systems, even if they were nothing like any weapon humanity had ever built. All of it dead and cold and rotating very slowly in the darkness. She found the Kret warship, the one Drev identified on the first day. 8,000 years of drift, moving it only slightly from where it died. She put it on the main screen, and no one said a word about it for almost a minute. "Something killed this," said Pilot Sergeant Jainair. "Something killed all of this," Webb said. "Something that is still here," Nair said. "Yes." Nair nodded. He turned back to his controls. He continued their movement. Oshi noticed that he didn't slow down. She noticed that none of her crew, despite everything, suggested turning back. She filed that away in her memory and did not comment. The alien fleet detected them when they were 2 hours away from the fortress. The contact was immediate. A narrow-beam transmission aimed exactly at the Ganges, which told Oshi that the fleet had been tracking them since they entered the graveyard. She accepted the signal. The translation software that Earth had loaded onto the Ganges before departure, compiled from the linguistic work on the fortress signal, processed it almost in real time. The message was from something called the Galactic Assembly Observation Fleet. It identified itself. It ordered the Ganges to stop and hold position. It said the region was under assembly jurisdiction pending a safety determination, and unauthorized ships were not permitted to pass. Oshi read it. She typed her response. This is Commander Yara Oshi of the Earth exploration vessel Ganges. The transmission we are investigating originated from coordinates in our home solar system. We are continuing to investigate a signal originating in our own solar system. We will do so peacefully and without hostile intent. We appreciate the Assembly's concern for our safety. She closed the channel. They are going to try to stop us, Nair said. Let them try, Cho said softly, which surprised everyone a little, because Cho was usually quiet. The alien fleet did not try. They called 2 more times, and then went into silence. Oshi imagined the conversations happening on those ships. She imagined many arguments and very little agreement. She thought that whoever was in command there was either very wise or very unsure, because a wise commander and an unsure one would have made the same call here. Wait and watch. The Ganges continued moving. The fortress filled the viewing port. Up close, it was a different thing than sensor readings or probe images could convey. It had a presence not in a mystical sense, but in the physical sense of something so large and so solid that the space around it felt different. The way a mountain changes the feel of a valley without doing anything, just by being there. Oshi held them at 5 kilometers. She looked at the gun emplacements. She counted the defensive platforms. She read the writings on the hull in the telescope lens, the same geometric angular signs that Webb's colleagues were working on back on Earth. Up close, she could see how deep the cuts were, how precise, not the work of automation, the work of something with hands and intent. Dark, Nair said. No power signature. The alien fleet said it woke up when they got too close, Oshi said. We are close, Nair said. We are close, she said. She opened a channel on the frequency used by the transmission. She didn't know what to say. She thought about what the message said. She thought about the last 4 words. She said, "This is Ganges from Earth. We have received your message." The silence after that lasted 11 seconds. Then the fortress lit up. Not one warning light, all of it. Every platform, every installation, every surface, flooding with a steady blue-white light that made the surrounding darkness even darker by contrast. The sensor panel screamed. Webb grabbed his console. Nair's hands were on the controls. Weapons? Oshi asked. Her voice was steady. No, Cho said, reading fast. No weapons charging. Power is on across the entire structure. But this isn't a combat configuration. This is more like... She stopped. She looked at her screen. It looks like it just woke up. Full systems are running in diagnostic mode. Oshi, it's performing a diagnostic like a ship that just came out of standby. How long had it been in standby? Webb asked. No one answered, because no one knew, but everyone thought about it. A door opened in the hull, not a gun port, not a defensive system turning on a door. Large, clearly created for a ship to dock with it, installed in the main structure in a position protected on 3 sides by the fortress's own mass. The Ganges sat there for a moment. It opened a door for us, Nair said. Yes, Oshi said. We are entering, Nair said. Not a question. We are entering, she confirmed. The docking bay inside was large enough to fit 20 times the size of the Ganges. The air was breathable. That was the first thing the sensors confirmed. And that was the thing that made Webb sit down heavily in his chair, because it meant whoever built this knew who would come. You don't fill a bay with a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere by accident. You do it because you know something is about to dock there. The gravity was standard Earth gravity. The temperature was 21 degrees. The lights that turned on when they stepped off the ship were tuned to a wavelength that human eyes found comfortable and clear. They built this for us, Webb said. They built this for someone like us, Oshi said. No, Webb said quietly. Look at the height of the door. Look at the proportions of this space. Look at where the lights are located. He turned slowly, soaking it all in. They built this for bipedal creatures of approximately human height with eyes, approximately where our eyes are located. No one argued with him. They went deeper. The record room was in the heart of the fortress. It was not locked. The door opened when they approached. Inside, the walls were covered from floor to ceiling with angular script, but there were also images. Not photographs, not screens something between the two. Surfaces that held images the way paper holds ink, fixed and permanent. The images showed people, human people, or close enough to human that the difference, if there was one, was invisible to Oshi's eyes. Bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, Faces with 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth, dressed in clothes she did not recognize, standing in front of ships she did not recognize, standing in front of what was very clearly this fortress still under construction in some images, completed and lit in others. Webb was pulling out his translation tools before Oshi could say a word. He worked for 2 hours while the rest of the crew moved carefully through the room, documenting everything, touching nothing. At the end of the 2 hours, he called Oshi and showed her his screen. He had translated enough. The story was not complete. It would take months to translate entirely. But the outline of it was there, carved into these walls 15,000 years ago by people who knew they were leaving and wanted what came after them to understand why. 15,000 years ago, there was a human civilization, not primitive, not early, advanced, spacefaring, spread across several worlds in this star system and nearby neighboring systems, not an empire in the grand sense. The records described something more like a network, many communities, many voices, bound by common technology and common history. They weren't alone. The galaxy, then as now, was full of other civilizations. Most of those civilizations looked at the small network of human worlds and saw something to take resources, space, labor. The wars were long. The records described them without self-pity and without drama. The way people who have gone through terrible things sometimes describe them. Clear, because the weight of the event needs no embellishment. The human civilization was almost destroyed. 3 separate times enemies came within reach of the home world. 3 separate times something stopped them. After the 3rd time, the survivors made a decision. They built the fortress. They named it in their own script, something Webb first translated as the last argument, and then revised as the word that ends the conversation. They built it over decades. They put everything they knew about war and defense and endurance into it. They designed it to operate without them, to maintain itself, to defend the system from everything that came, forever or as close to forever as engineering could reach. They built into it a DNA recognition system, a key, biologically and signature key, that would identify the descendants of the builders and would open only to them. Then they left. Not all of them. Some remained on the home world, starting over, returning to simple things, waiting to grow again into what would come next. But most of them left. They went deeper into space beyond the reach of the enemies that broke them, somewhere safe, searching for somewhere new. The records didn't say where they went. The last entry in the record room simply said, "We will not return, but you will be here. You are always going to be here. We left you the wall. The wall will hold." It had always held. Oshi read this on Webb's screen. She read it a second time. She looked at the images on the walls, at the faces of people who were 15,000 years dead and looked enough like her that she could have passed them on the street. Her ancestors had been almost wiped from the galaxy before agriculture, before cities, before writing by a history that humanity knew nothing about. Some part of her civilization, some part that never made it into any history book, that rose and fought and broke and made the hardest decision available, it had gone and left the wall standing, and the wall had held every time. She thought about the graveyard outside, about the Kret Empire and the Thorn stories and the Dual Memorial and 16 other species and 15,000 years of attempts. She thought about what the fortress had said to all of them without ever saying a word. She thought about the strike fleet that was on its way now. She checked her count. 70, 1 days out. She straightened up. "Webb," she said, "how long to translate the technical documentation, gun systems, defensive architecture, how it works?" Webb looked at her. "You think we should learn how to use it?" he asked. "I think," Oshi said, "that it belongs to us." She said it simply, without drama, the way a person asserts something that is just true. Webb was quiet for a moment. 6 weeks, he said. "Maybe less." "Start now," she said. The first thing Oshi did after reading the records was sleep for 6 hours. Webb thought it was strange. He hadn't slept properly for 3 days and had no plans to start. The record room had more walls, and every wall had more script, and he was not going to stop until he had read all of it, or his body gave out, whichever happened first. Oshi slept because she had learned over 20 years of long missions and hostile environments that decisions made on an empty and exhausted mind are the kind of decisions you spend the rest of your career explaining. She had a strike fleet approaching and 71 days to be ready for it, and she needed to be sharp for all 71 of them. She woke up, ate, and went to find Cho. "Tell me what you know," she said. Cho had spent the 6 hours while Oshi slept doing what she did, walking around the system until she understood it. The fortress was huge, but its logic, once you started following it, was clean. Military engineering had a clarity that civil engineering sometimes lacked. Everything had a purpose. Everything connected to something else. No waste, no decorations, no features that did not serve a function. Power source in the deep core, Cho said, showing Oshi the data she had compiled. I don't completely understand it yet, something that shouldn't still be working after 15,000 years. But here we are. Gun systems are distributed, not centralized. There is no single point you could hit to disable them. You would have to disable each emplacement individually and... She paused. How many? Oshi asked. On this main structure, 240 confirmed active emplacements. On the outer platforms, another 180. She stopped. She turned to look at Oshi. That's not the part that matters. Tell me the part that matters, Oshi said. Cho brought up a map on her screen. The map showed the graveyard, a full field of debris rendered in sensor data, color-coded by mass and material. I performed a detailed scan of the debris field, Cho said, looking at every object, every piece of debris, every fragment, every dead ship. She tapped the screen. Sections of the debris field changed color. This is not debris. Oshi looked at the map. Approximately a third of what the alien fleet had cataloged as debris was highlighted, distributed across the field. Not grouped, spread evenly, almost geometrically, across the entire volume of the graveyard in a pattern that was not random at all once you looked at it directly from above. Gun platforms, Oshi said. Disguised as debris, Cho said. Covered in debris, covered in materials that read as dead metal on a standard scan. They have been sitting in this field I don't know how long. The oldest ones, by material analysis, at least 10,000 years. They were in standby, cold, completely invisible to anything that wasn't looking for them specifically. For what? Something that was not looking for them specifically. Oshi studied the map. The fortress was not just a fortress. The entire graveyard was a fortress. Any fleet that came in force would move through the debris field to reach the main structure. Any fleet moving through the debris field would move between and around and past several hundred disguised gun platforms before getting close enough to see the main structure clearly. They would already be inside the kill zone. They would be inside it from the moment they entered the graveyard. Every fleet that ever came here did the same thing, moved through what looked like proof of previous failures, not realizing that proof of previous failures was also the weapon that made them fail. 15,000 years of the same trap, 15,000 years of it working. Oshi stood there for a moment with that thought. Do the platforms respond to the fortress systems? She asked. Yes, Cho said. Full integration. They all came online when the fortress woke up for us. They are in standby now, just as the main installations are waiting. Can we control them from inside the fortress? Cho looked at her firmly. Yes. Oshi nodded. She went to find Webb. On day 31, Oshi opened a communication channel with the alien fleet. The response came from Admiral Seraph, which told Oshi that the Vilkrats were still the most rational voice in the fleet, and that Seraph had made sure she was the one handling the contact. The translation software managed the exchange almost in real time, rough around the edges but functional. Oshi introduced herself. She told Seraph what they had found inside the fortress. Not everything, not the gun platforms, not the technical details, but the history, the records, the history of the civilization that built this place. And why? Seraph listened. When Oshi finished, Seraph was quiet for a long time. You say this structure belongs to your species, Seraph said. I say it. This structure was built by our ancestors to protect our home system, Oshi said. That is what the records show. The recognition system in the fortress confirms it. It opened for us and no one else in 15,000 years. Another silence. The strike force is approaching, Seraph said. 60 ships. I want you to understand that I personally do not support this action. I want you to understand when I say this, it is not a negotiation tactic. I am telling you because you need to know. I know, Oshi said. We have been watching their transit. They will arrive in 40 days. Supreme Counselor Drev commands the strike force. He believes the fortress is an existential threat to the Galactic Assembly. Seraph paused. He is not irrational. The graveyard is a serious argument for his position. The graveyard, Oshi said carefully, is proof that the fortress defends itself. When attacked, that is not the same as an existential threat. I know that, Seraph said. Drev knows that too. The difference between Drev and me is that I think the distinction matters. Oshi thought about what to say next. "We will not fire first," she said. "I want that on the record. If the strike force holds position and does not attack, nothing will happen to them. And if they do not hold position?" Oshi said nothing. She didn't need to. 40 days moved differently than any days Oshi could remember. Webb was translating. He barely stopped. He slept in the record room, sometimes curled up on the floor with translation equipment working next to him. And Oshi stopped trying to make him do otherwise, because the information he was pulling out of those walls was worth more than a few hours of proper rest could measure. The crew moved through the fortress. They studied it like you study a ship you are about to rely on. Not just the systems, the shape of it, the way sound moved through the corridors, the specific light in specific rooms, the feeling of walking through something that was built to last and had fulfilled it completely. Nair spent most of his off-duty hours in the docking bay, running his hand along the walls. He never explained why. No one asked. On day 39, Cho brought all gun systems fully online for a test cycle. She did it carefully, one system at a time, reading the response, calibrating. The energy output was staggering even at 20% power. She ran it for 4 minutes, then returned to standby and sat quietly for a moment after that. "It works," she said to Oshi. "All of it. Every emplacement, every platform in the field. All of it. 15,000 years and everything works." She said the last part, the way you say something you cannot completely fit inside your understanding of the world, not with awe, just with a kind of respect for the craftsmanship of it, for the people who built something and meant every word of what they built. The strike fleet arrived on day 41. 60 ships, dropping out of transit at the edge of the system, moving in formation. 6 capital ships of the Thorn in the center of the formation, the way the biggest stones sit in the center of a wall. Even from inside the fortress, the sensor readings were readable. Oshi had Cho put them on the main display and looked at the fleet for a long time. 60 ships. She thought about what she was looking at. Then she opened a communication channel. Supreme Counselor Vred answered personally. He was older than she expected from Seref's description. His face had the texture of something that had survived a lot and had the marks to show it. He looked at Oshi with the specific expression of a person who has been told an important piece of information and who is still deciding whether to believe it. "Commander Oshi," he said. The translation software made his voice flat but precise. "You are aboard the structure." "I am," she said. "You must evacuate to a safe distance," he said. "What we are going to do will leave nothing standing." "Supreme Counselor," Oshi said, "I want to show you something before you make any decisions." She nodded. Cho brought up the external cameras, a full view of the debris field. Then she launched the overlay scan, the same scan she had launched on day 31, highlighting everything that was not dead metal, everything that was waiting. She broadcast it to the strike fleet. On 60 ships, sensor operators and commanders and tactical officers looked at their screens and saw the graveyard reclassify itself in real time. Saw the debris field resolving into something that was not a debris field. Saw gun platforms scattered across it like seeds in soil evenly, intentionally, in a pattern that had a word for it. And the word was kill zone. The fleet channel went very quiet. Vred looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. The specific thing that happens when a person who was sure of a plan realizes that the plan was built on an incomplete picture. "Those platforms," he said. "They have been in standby for 10,000 years, Oshi said. "They came online when we arrived. They are in standby now. Every ship currently inside the debris field is within their operational radius." She paused. "Supreme Counselor, your fleet moved into the graveyard to approach the fortress. I want you to understand that the moment you crossed the debris field, you were already inside the defensive perimeter." "Silence. You are telling me," Vred said slowly, "that we are already inside it." "Yes, that every fleet that ever came here was inside from the beginning," Oshi said. "Yes." Vred was quiet for a moment that stretched. "They never had a chance," he said. "Not a question. The fortress does not attack," Oshi said. "It never attacked. Everything in the graveyard came here and chose to fight. The fortress just made sure the choice had a permanent outcome." She kept her voice even factual, the way her ancestors apparently wrote their history, without embellishment, because the thing itself was sufficient. "I am not threatening your fleet, Supreme Counselor. I am telling you that this structure does exactly what it was built for. It has done it without failure for 15,000 years, and it belongs to us. If your fleet holds position and does not fire, nothing will happen to anyone. This is not a negotiation, this is a description of how it works." Vred looked at her across the screen. She looked back. She sat in a chair inside a 60-kilometer fortress that her ancestors had built to make exactly this argument, and she was doing it quietly. And she did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. "The Assembly will demand official documentation of your historical claim," he said. "Translated records, authentication, independent verification. We will provide all of that," Oshi said. "There will be an official process. It will take time, we understand." Vred looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. The specific thing that shifts when a person stops arguing and begins to accept an uncomfortable acceptance, the kind that comes from being shown something truthful that changes the shape of what you thought you knew. "The Kret Empire," he said. "They were the most powerful civilization in this galaxy for 2,000 years. "Yes," Oshi said, "and they came here." "Yes, and they lost." Oshi said nothing. The graveyard said it for her. Vred was quiet for a moment. "Who were your ancestors, Commander?" It was an honest question. A non-hostile question of a person who was sincerely trying to place a new piece in a picture that had just become much larger. "I don't know entirely yet," Oshi said. "We are still reading the records, but they were people who got hit hard enough and often enough that they built this instead of fighting another war. They put everything they had left into this, and then they left it standing." She looked around at the walls of the room in which she sat, at the faint hum of 15,000 years of patient mechanisms. "They trusted us to grow and find this." She thought about the signal broadcasting for an unknown number of years, directed at a little blue world where something was becoming what it would be. She thought about the recognition system, the nitrogen-oxygen air in the docking bay, the lights at the right height, the door that opened without a request. Not a gift, exactly. Not a weapon, exactly something in between. A foundation. An argument made in metal and composite, and 15,000 years of silence that said, "We were here, and we were real, and we did not fall, and neither will you. The Assembly will stand down," Vred said, "pending the official process." "Thank you, Supreme Counselor," Oshi said. The channel closed. That evening, Oshi stood by the window on the upper level of the fortress. The graveyard was visible from here. Hundreds of dead ships rotating slowly in the darkness, illuminated now by the fortress's working lights. For the first time in who knew how long, this field was something other than cold and black. The light made the wrecks look different, less like a warning and more like a record. Proof of something true, left in the darkness for someone honest enough to read it. Nair came up and stood beside her. He had a cup of coffee. He discovered remarkably that the water recyclers in the fortress were still functional and adapted them to the ship's supplies in about 4 hours, because Nair was that type of person. He looked at the graveyard. 16 species, he said. "At least," Oshi said. 15,000 years. "Yes." Nair drank his coffee. "We were farming," he said, "when they built this. Somewhere on Earth, someone was calculating wheat. Some of us were." "Yes," Oshi said. Nair was quiet for a moment. "Those who built this, those who left you, think they made it, wherever they were?" Oshi thought about it. She had thought about it a lot over the last 41 days. She had no answer that was anything more than hope dressed as a theory. "I think they were the type of people who did things that lasted 15,000 years, she said. "I think people like that tend to be difficult to finish." Nair nodded. He seemed to find that sufficient. They stood there together in the light of the fortress, looking at the old, dead fleet of the galaxy's long history of attempts, and at the stars beyond, cold and countless and full of things that were still unknown. The fortress hummed quietly around them, patient, proven.